I'm Ellie.
And I'm Martin.
And today we have come to the Knockando Woollen Mill to learn all about weaving.
Hope you enjoy.
Knockando Woollen Mill has been in continuous use on this site for more than 230 years. It is the only example of the tradition for combining textile production with agriculture that still survives. Until the 19th century, the tradition of carding, spinning and weaving was done by hand at home. But walking, washing and dyeing cloth needed a plentiful supply of water and more room than the average cottage had, so most communities had a nearby mill where cloth could be processed more easily. Knockando Mill was sited on an agricultural tenancy which Anne and William Grant held in the 1780s. Agriculture and textile production went hand in hand, and some farm tenancies at this time also had watermills. Knockando is the sole survivor of the Scottish tradition of combining agriculture and textile production that remains in active use today. In 1863, Alexander Smith moved here and spent the next 40 years mechanising and improving the wool mill. His son James and his wife Emma took over the mill in 1902, and with the help from the Carron estate, they converted an existing building into a new house with the most modern embellishments of the time. The mill house is today used as a design studio and office. The old shop and office is where farmers brought their fleeces to be converted into yarn, cloth or blankets. It's also where customers purchased tweed and other products. The large sign could be seen from the road above, so people knew where to come. In the 1920s, Winnie and Duncan Stewart ran the mill. Winnie would sit in the old shop, which was lit by a carbide lamp, and bind the edges of blankets on a whipping machine. Her special customers would be offered a glass of sherry. The cottage is the oldest building that still stands on this site. It would have originally had a thatched roof made from heather and a central open fire. On display here are 14 layers of original wallpaper which were applied here at the beginning of the 20th century. The water wheel is second-hand and came from nearby Pitcroy in the mid-1860s. It is an overshot water wheel which is fed from the pond through a large clay pipe. The water wheel drove the machinery with the help of a paraffin engine until 1949, when mains electricity came along. The weaving shed houses two Dobcross looms, the workhorses of the British textile industry. As with all of the machines at the wool mill, they are second-hand. They date to the 1890s and are perhaps the oldest surviving looms in Scotland that are still in good working order. Threads are prepared meticulously by hand before being hand-wound onto stakes or warping boards. This process is called stake warping and ensures the threads are correctly aligned and tensioned before they are placed in the loom. When the loom is set up, shuttles are thrown between the horizontal threads, called wefts, to a preset pattern. Cloth which is woven with a shuttle like this has a unique feature. The edges are perfectly salvaged, which means there is no need to turn a hem. In 1945, the gable end of the weaving shed was washed away in a flood. It was later rebuilt in brick. The staff at the time recall weaving in the fresh air. The scouring shed is thought to be the oldest part of the mill. It is now used to blend and untangle wool fibre before it can be carded and spun. Apart from the 1919 automatic feeder, all the machinery in here is at least second-hand. Wool is manually placed into the automatic feeder where it passes over the toothed rollers of the carding sets. Carding pulls out and aligns the fibres in a similar way to brushing your hair. The wool travels over rollers and is turned at right angles before being carded again. This thoroughly blends the colours and ensures the fibres are perfectly aligned. The wool comes off in loose ropes or slubbings. The slubbings are then placed in the condenser, which compresses them into 30 streams of wool, or rovings. These are now ready to turn into yarn. The rovings are placed onto 120 spindles on the spinning mule. These are on carriages which move forward and backwards, creating a twist. The twist is what gives the yarn its strength. Once the yarn has been spun, it can then be hanged into knitting yarn, plied up to make a thicker yarn, or woven. After a yarn has been woven, it is then put through the teasel gig. This is filled with real teasels which are dampened. As the cloth passes over them, they fluff it up, so it is less coarse and scratchy. The tenter frame is where the wet cloths were attached to hooks and left in the breeze to dry. This is the origin of the phrase "on tenter hooks." A premium was attached to summer dried cloth because they were softer than those dried inside. Cloth was also dried in a shed behind the mill where sulphur was used to whiten them. During World War I, the mill was contracted by the War Department to manufacture blankets. A drying shed was built to allow them to be dried during the winter. The completed blankets were sent to London by train from Knockando station. The conservation training workshop was completed in 2010. It is used to restore the mill's historic machinery. It is also used to train a new generation on the art of weaving. The byre was originally a range of agricultural buildings where feed and hay were stored, along with cattle, a horse, a gig and a tractor. Strangely, there is no evidence that the agricultural part of this site ever raised sheep. It has now been sensitively restored into a visitor centre, cafe and shop. The garden was a productive kitchen garden with a hen house and a beehive. The summer house was built for James and Emma's adopted daughter Elsie. She had TB and it allowed her to enjoy fresh air without getting cold. The privy, which is obviously not in use now, was probably built around the same time as the mill house in the early 1900s. The garden was redesigned by BBC Two's Beechgrove Garden team in 2013 and is maintained by volunteers. It's been planted with plants and flowers from which natural dyes can be made, so the ethos of naturally dyeing plants with sustainable and compostable materials continues and causes as little waste as possible.
Really hope you enjoyed your wander around Knockando Woollen Mill.
It's really nice. A nice garden done by BBC Two Beechgrove's garden team.
Yeah, it is a lovely little garden. And this place is full of history. It's actually free to enter. Car parking is free. It's free to wander around. They do ask you for donations. There are little tubs around about the place. And we've put several in, haven't we?
We certainly have.
Yeah. It's fascinating to learn about the history of weaving.
Yeah.
From what we understand, they are actually training up a couple of people, teaching them how to weave. So in the future, maybe even when you come to visit, there will probably be a person actually weaving so that you can talk to.
Yeah, and they do actually have a conservation training workshop here to train up the future generations to use this machinery and to maintain it.
Yeah. But it's been fascinating to walk around.
Yeah.
Really
Hope you
interesting
enjoyed.
place. Yes.
Oh, and by the way,
What's that?
hello!
Thank you for watching. Take care now and we'll see you next time.
Bye now!
Bye.